Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Policy Research Land Rights Initiative Speaker Series. We are very pleased to welcome Rahul Basu, who's going to speak to us today about the future we need, natural resources as a shared inheritance. Rahul is very modest. He didn't want me to say much about him, but he's involved in several initiatives, including the Goa Foundation, the Goenchi Mati Movement, and the Future We Need. He's on the Executive Committee of Mines, Minerals and People and the Interim Executive Committee of the India Network for Basic Income. But he also has a lot of experience and work in the areas of economics and management, in finance and accounting, public policy, corruption, anti-corruption, and governance issues, having worked in ICICI Bank as well, and worked in the area of project finance as well as mergers, acquisitions, and investments. Rahul is also the founder and CEO of Ajade, a consulting firm for startups and small companies, and a member of the Indian Angel Network. He's a member of Kokum Design, a design profit, and is currently based out of Goa, involved in various social initiatives. The goal of the Land Rights Initiative Speaker Series is essentially to provide a platform for discussion amongst various stakeholders on issues relating to land and, of course, mining and both mining of natural resources as well as what we think about how we should think about our natural resources in an intergenerational and an intragenerational equity perspective are very, very central to conflicts around land today. So in that context, really looking forward to hearing about the work that you have been doing on mining in Goa, but also your work more extensively with the Mines, Minerals and People and other organizations in other parts of the country as well. So without further ado, welcome.
Thanks, Namita, and I hope it's okay if I stand. Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. Okay, so just you've heard all about who I am, and there's a little backstory to how I got involved in all of this. Basically, I used to be I'm in Goa, and in Goa, you all know it's a tourist destination. And the general talk in Goa is that 40% of the profit in tourism comes in the 2 weeks around Christmas and New Year's. This was 2 years into of living in Goa, and is already involved in a couple of social causes, and basically nothing was changing. You could protest all you want, but the government really didn't give a damn. And what triggered me off was between Christmas and New Year's, being on Kandoli, having dinner, coming out and finding the road had been dug up. And it set me thinking, like, which government at the peak season would dig up the main road? And so asking, sort of, if you've done total quality management, the 5 why technique, why is this happening and why did that happen, kind of a thing, eventually came to the conclusion that there was so much money coming from mining in Goa that the politicians were buying the elections, and then they were telling us that they were democratically elected and we could basically go and shut up. And so then I figured that if we had to get good governance, or any semblance of governance actually, then we had to stop the money conduit. So looked around who's the most effective NGO, turned out to be Goa Foundation, and started with Goa Foundation. This was way back in 2011. So that's where I come into it. Goa Foundation itself is an NGO working on the environment from 1986. And they do many things, but public interest litigation is a prominent aspect of what they do, and probably why they're better known outside of Goa. But within Goa, they actually do practical things. They've restored a mine along with Sesa Goa. They've run a big garbage dump, which was a festering problem. And they've, so it's not just theory, but they actually put stuff into practice. So working with Goa Foundation, we got a really lucky break in 2012 when the Shah Commission report on Goa was accidentally placed on the floor of the Parliament in September 2012. Immediately, various bans were put into place, and Goa Foundation went to the Supreme Court saying that, we need to do something about this, because the Shah Commission had documented a whole range of illegalities which were being committed in Goa. And of course, just before that, the Karnataka Lokayukt report had come out from Santosh Hegde, and that also showed some really amazing amounts of illegalities. And the players actually are quite the same. The same guys are mining both in Goa and Karnataka. So we went to the Supreme Court and said, let's stop the mining. We also took a whole range of scientific studies showing how mining was damaging different aspects of the environment in Goa, all the way from vibration, dust pollution, agriculture problems, people dying, health problems, the rivers being polluted, even the oceans were getting polluted. So we brought all of that. And our plea was, just like in the Aravalis, put a permanent ban on mining. Because, this is in the Western Ghats, high biodiversity. Clearly, you have an industry out of control. The Shah Commission had documented not only was the industry out of control, but it was in collusion with the government and the bureaucracy. So, a permanent ban would be the best thing. The Goa government came back in response and said, 20% of the population of Goa are dependent on mining, and we cannot have a ban on mining because then there will be riots in the streets. And there'll be blood on your hands effectively. So Supreme Court was a little bit stuck, but in the course of the various discussions, one point came up which the Shah Commission had raised. They said that based on the reserves data from IBM, what's been extracted, 577 million tons of iron ore reserves are left. Environment clearances for 66 million tons are available. 577 divided by 66. The minerals can get exhausted in 9 years. What happens to future generations? Don't they have a right to minerals? The Supreme Court picked this up and said, yes, we've said intergenerational equity is a part of right to life. It's a constitutional right. So what do? So we proposed instead of 9 years, let's extract over 100 years. At least that's 3 generations. Supreme Court came back and said, what about the 101st year? What about the people after that? Don't they have rights also? So we're all scratching our heads. Supreme Court set up a committee who was tasked to look at imposing a cap on grounds of intergenerational equity, both from the angle of exhausting the minerals as well as the massive environment and human rights damage. We in turn started going back and looking at what is this intergenerational equity, what does this thing mean actually? And that's really where this whole work starts from. Now, intergenerational equity, when you get into the theory, there are multiple strands in different fields. There's one strand really coming from the environment world. The trigger point really in some senses was Our Common Future, the Brundtland report in 87. And that was really an environmental strand. And the basic idea is really what we talk about in sustainability, that what we've received various kinds of environmental assets, and the future also should have access to a reasonable standard of living. Then we look further, and this turns out to be another strand of work which comes from the economic side. And this is really Hartwig's rule is sort of the starting point. And the World Bank, interestingly, had done a lot of work. And there the philosophy was very simple. Minerals, if you have certain amount of minerals, once you exhaust the minerals, you must make sure that you have assets of equal value. So the idea is basically you have two kinds of capital. You exhaust one kind of capital, but you have another kind of capital of equal value. So these were two different strands, and we were now trying to figure out how do you reconcile these two. And of course, there's the other question of what do you do about those, exhaustion of the minerals. So I'm just going to cut a long story short in terms of like the evolution and come directly to where we've now reached. So the basic idea of intergenerational equity, as far as we can tell, is the idea that it is our duty to ensure that what we have inherited is passed on to the next generation. It might be a set of opportunities, a set of assets, various things. But if we have received it, what we do with these opportunities and assets in our lifetime is our problem. But the next generation should have the same, if not more. Ideally, we leave them something from our lifetime, but what we've received, they should receive. And this is very clear from the World Bank kind of work. The second part of it is, if you have ensured that the next generation receives the capital, then you have the right to consume the income from this capital. So in very practical terms, suppose you have a plot of land. Now you have two choices. One is you can flog the land and keep on triple cropping it, but if you do that constantly, then most likely your land will get infertile within your lifetime. So just passing on infertile land to the next generation is not fair. So you must leave your land fallow so that the productivity of the land is maintained. So that is the first duty, to maintain the value of the capital. If you have maintained your land properly, then you have a right to consume the income. And if you think about it intergenerationally, the next generation will inherit the same land that you have and will also be able to consume the same crop that you've been consuming. So in that sense, each generation, as long as the land is maintained, each generation is getting a crop that they can consume. Okay, so then how does this basic principle now flow through? I'll come back to the environment side of it, but I want to talk about what's really become the more important part of the work. And it's come down to 5 basic principles that we boiled it down to. And this is really the heart of the talk. So at the end of the 5 principles, if you don't agree, then we should have a discussion. Principle 1 is this: the state owns natural resources as a trustee on behalf of the people and especially future generations. Okay? So essentially, minerals are a commons with the state as a trustee, or all natural resources. The second principle is, we've inherited the natural resources because none of us have created any natural resource. So our duty is to make sure the next generation also inherits the natural resources or their value in some form or the other. That's principle 2. Principle 3 is, if we mine, we are effectively selling the minerals, because after the mining we no longer have the minerals. So presumably we've got compensation for the mineral. So just imagine you're selling your gold. You want to make sure you've got the money. So principle 3 is, if we mine, we must make sure we get the full value of the minerals other than any extraction cost and some profit for the miner. That's 3. Principle 4 is, everything we receive, we must save for the future generations. And there's a little wrinkle out here. Just like we had to keep the land fallow and stuff like that, there are 2 kinds of assets. There's something called wasting assets that depreciate or reduce in value over time. And there are what's called non-wasting assets, in which inheritances are traditionally kept. These are classically precious metals, precious stones, and land. Cars, buildings, bridges, all of these are wasting assets. You don't keep inheritances in those. In modern times, countries have another sort of tool they use, which is basically like a big mutual fund. Or again, you can think of it as an endowment fund or a corpus fund of an NGO. With the proviso, just like you have to keep land fallow, here to the extent of inflation, you have to put money back into the fund, into the main principle, so that the real value of the corpus is maintained. So your capital is protected, your first duty. So principle 4 is, whatever you receive, you must save for future generations. And specifically in the case of minerals, we're talking about this kind of a fund called a permanent fund. Norway is a great example. Principle 5 is that we all own the mineral. So we all own the fund which has been created from the mineral. So if there's any income beyond this inflation, the real income of this fund is also owned by everybody. So just share it equally with everybody as a right of ownership. A citizen's dividend or a commons dividend. So that's it. That's our 5 principles. I repeat them. The state is a trustee on behalf of the people, and we all own the minerals or natural resources together. We've inherited the minerals, so they or their value must pass on to the next generation. When we mine, we must get the full value of our minerals. Everything we receive, we must save in a new asset for the next generation because the minerals are gone. And any income coming from this new asset distributed equally to everybody as owners as a citizen's dividend. Yeah. We argue that when you think about minerals in this fashion, this actually seems so obvious now that this should be the default in mining, and anything we look at should be examined against it. And let me talk about why I'm saying what is different. So the three operational principles are 3, 4 and 5. Zero loss mining, save everything, distribute income equally. So we went back in Goa. So we had this whole analysis and we were going to present this to the expert committee the Supreme Court had said. We said, before we do that, let's find out what's been happening historically in Goa. Has these principles being met? In which case there's nothing to say. So how do we do that? Now, all mining in Goa is private sector. And if you look at principle 3, get the full value of the mineral, we need two pieces of information. What is the value of the mineral and what did we receive? Right. So those are the two you have to compare. Now, since mining is private sector, we just did a simple thought experiment. We had CESA Goa's annual reports, now Vedanta. CESA Goa accounted for 1/3 of the mining in Goa, and fully integrated, so quite representative of the industry. And we had the industry body, the GMOEA, they had physical data, so we could scale up from CESA Goa to all Goa numbers, and we had it for a period of 8 years. So we said that whatever CESA Goa sold the mineral for, we could have sold the mineral for the same value. We could have asked CESA Goa, please be a contractor, and they would have correctly charged us every single paisa of their expenses. Plus, they need to make a profit. They're in business. They're not a charity organization. Now, in these kinds of businesses, a 10 to 12% in India, a 10 to 12% after-tax return on assets would be very good. Because Vedanta actually was arguing for a 12% return in the instance of Cairn Energy, which is a much more complex operation. So we said instead of putting a 12% return on assets, we set it at 20%. So, it's very, very high. So nobody can argue that the mining company is not making adequate profit. So we said after that, every single paisa should have come to the state as the owner. And by the way, I don't know how many of you know this. How many of you know who owns minerals in the country? But there's a lot of confusion on that. It's generally thought that the nation owns the minerals, but actually that's incorrect. In most states, it's the state which owns the mineral, not the country. And there are pockets of land where the landowner themselves own the minerals. And in certain 6th schedule and 5th schedule areas, the tribes also have certain rights to the minerals. But it's not the nation, it's the state, the subnational entity. So he said the state of Goa should have received the compensation. So over 8 years, this is the results we found. I haven't used a presentation because this is not very much I have. 88,000 crores of minerals were exported. So 88 is the simple figure. The expense against it was 31,000 crores and a 20% profit on after-tax profit on assets was 3,000 crores. It's really so small because actually these companies don't do very much work themselves. They outsource it further. So the capital is any case put in by the outsourcing partners. So 34 is the expense, and by subtraction 54,000 crores is the value of the mineral. Yeah? Is this bit clear? Yeah. So there are two obvious questions. One is, how much should the state government have received? I'm talking about should. The obvious answer is they should have received every single paisa of this, right? 54,000 crores. Now this is historical. We went to the state government budget data and saw how much did the state government actually receive. So this is a question for you guys now. You all are Indians. This is the legal system. This is from financial accounts, state government budget. How much do you think the government of Goa actually received for 54,000 crores of minerals? Take some guesses, guys. Percentages of 20,000 crores. Anybody else? I know there are a few people know the answer, but come on, guys. This is your country. This 4,000 crores. Who is that? Okay, 4,000 crores there. Anybody else? Numbers, percentages, you can go either way. You're quite pessimistic about a nation. So you're saying we lost 50,000 crores, we got 4,000. Well, the truth is you're not far off, we actually got 2,500 crores. Yes, oh my God. Literally, oh my God. So we lost 51,500 crores. Now, if you think about it conceptually, what we've done is we've taken, that's less than 5%, so we lost 95% of the value. Now, where did that go? Conceptually, what we've done is we've sold something worth 100 rupees for 5. Now, the guy who's bought something worth 100 for 5 is showing 95 rupees as profit. So, a good chunk went to the center as income tax, but most of it went to the mining companies as additional profit. So, while they should have made 3,000 crores as profit after tax, and this was very generous if you remember, instead of 12% you put 20, they made an additional 32,000 crores of profit after tax, white. So remember, this is all from annual reports of the mining companies. This is what they're telling us is happening. And we're not assuming any illegal mining, over-invoicing, under-invoicing, none of that. This is how the official system is working. Okay. So then let's move on to principle 4. Did we at least save the 2,400 crores we received? No. Because governments account for mineral money as revenue. What do we call royalty? Revenue, windfall revenue. So that's also gone. Right, the government has spent it. So net, our future generations of Goa will receive 54,000 crores less than we did. 100% loss. Now let me explain the implications of this. I mean, obviously we lost 54,000 crores, let me explain some of the other implications. We sold something worth 100 for 5 rupees. Now, if you were the mining guy, you would say that while this is technically a legal deal, fundamentally it's illegitimate. If the public finds out, this is going to stop. So their incentives are to go and mine as quickly as possible and exit. Yes? I mean, you would do the same in their shoes, right? I would do it. I mean, this is a logical thing to do. But the implications is at that point, whether it's the tree, the tiger or the tribal, all are anti-development and anti-national. They are in the way. So, you have the environment damage, you have the human rights problem, you have the corruption and you have the Naxal problem. Coming just out of this. Let me explain the 54,000 crores in a few ways that will also sort of give you some sense of the scale, because obviously it's a big number. In those 8 years, the state government's revenues from all sources, including this 2,400 crores, was 27,000 crores. So imagine 27 was the revenues of the state, at the same time losing an inheritance of 54,000 crores. So again, think about your personal lives. If you earn 10,000 rupees a month and you lose 20,000 of your inheritance every month at the same time, it would be absurd. But this is what's been going on in Goa for 8 years continuously. Compare 27,000 crores of state government revenues with 32,000 crores of excess profit of the miners. Again, it tells you why this is happening. Now we can also look at this 54,000 crores in a different way. We all owned it together. So we all lost equally. So if you divide it by the population of Goa, in those 8 years, every single person in Goa, whether billionaire or beggar, lost 3.7 lakhs. Everybody, without exception. It's basically a poll tax or a per head tax.
In total or individually?
54,000 crores was in total, 3.7 lakhs was individual. Okay. Family of 4, 14.5 lakhs, NSSO 70th round, average household, private household assets in Goa 10.5 lakhs. So the common inheritance loss is more than the average private assets in Goa. Another way you can look at it, So let me just stick with that. So we all lost 3.7 lakhs and 40 mining families in Goa became super rich. Yeah. So we talk about socialism, we talk about trickle-down theory, we talk about equality, common good. But, I mean, does this fit into any of these conceptions? Fairness, justice? Another way to think about it, if we had taken the 54,000 crores, put it into a fund like I'm talking about, earned only 3% income beyond inflation and distributed it equally to everybody. I mean, that's what we could have done. Today, every person in the state of Goa would receive a citizen's dividend of 1,000 rupees a month. Every individual. We would have eliminated poverty. Instead, we've eliminated a lot of our wildlife and various other things. Now, you'll be saying, okay, this is Goa. Maybe Goa is an exception. Unfortunately, no, it's not. This is prevalent. So we have NMDC, iron ore mining in other parts of the India. 10 years data, the states lost 92%, not 95%. There's data for coal, oil and gas. Again in India, by 2005, before the China boom, the losses were already in excess of 50%. There's data from the World Bank which shows that the best case scenario in worldwide, I'm talking, this is not India, the best case scenario for oil is a 15% loss and for minerals a 35% loss. Again, I'm repeating, best case scenario. And just to give you a sense of some of the other work from the IMF and World Bank, let me give you two examples. Nigeria found oil in 1965, and this paper was written in 2003 up till 2000, jointly by one of the authors was our chief economic advisor, Arvind Subramanian. So they say between 65 and 2000, in 35 years, Nigeria had extracted $350 billion of oil. Between 65 and 2000, Nigeria's per capita income had fallen. So for $350 billion of oil, they had a drop in living standards. They had completely messed up the Niger Delta. They had enormous corruption and a civil war. And there was the same World Bank study, one of the two World Bank studies I was talking about. They had the counter example like I did, and they said that had countries like Nigeria, Trinidad, Tobago and Gabon taken their oil, the full value of the oil and saved it, this was in 2005, the per capita wealth in these countries would have been equivalent to South Korea. You can see this is a massive problem, and it is a massive global problem. Now let me carry on to the other aspect, which is the government accounting. And this is probably actually the major issue, not the lesser of the two. And it's a little arcane, but just bear with me. So when we call money from mining revenue, immediately more mining means more revenue. So that's good. When we call it windfall, a windfall is something essentially unpredictable. I mean, we don't know when the wind will blow. It's a lottery. Now, you don't look at your lotteries very closely, right? Because it's a lottery. Bhagwan jane where it's come from. So you don't actually analyze and see whether you got the right amount in your lottery. I mean, that makes no sense, right? There's no concept of that. So what's happening by calling it windfall revenue, we've created the dynamic of more is better, and we don't know. Whatever comes is good. If on the other hand, government said we are selling our family gold, we would have completely different issues. The first question would be, why are we selling our family gold? Are we so desperate today that we need to sell our family gold? I don't know how many of you remember the uproar in the country in 91 when we sent our gold as collateral for a loan to London. There was a huge hue and cry. Here we're selling it. So the first question is, why are we selling our family gold? The second question will be, is this the right time to sell family gold? Is the price high or is the price low? When will we sell gold? Obviously when the price is high. The third will be, what is its value and did we get the full amount? Fourth will be, what have we done with the money? Have we saved it for our children or have we gone and blown it up? So this is driving completely perverse behavior. And what's happening, and I'll give you an contemporary example of Alaska. Alaska is one of the classic great examples of having a permanent fund and actually the only example of paying a citizen's dividend. But only 25% of the money they get from oil they put into the fund. The remaining 75% is treated as revenue in the budget. It's so much for Alaska that Alaska basically has removed pretty much all other taxes and lives on this oil revenue. In 2005, Alaska's revenues, government revenues, was $3 billion. And I'm just using that definition of revenues for the moment to keep it simple. $3 billion. In 2013, Alaska's revenues went up to $8 billion. So in 8 years, it nearly tripled. Now, if you're a politician, you're saying, Baba, this is like boom time. Let me create jobs. Let me build bridges to nowhere, statues in the ocean, whatever else. Let me do stuff. Today, the budget is back at $3 billion because the oil prices have crashed. Now, what do? You have a few options. One is you can do what Saudi and all these Venezuela and all are doing, which is to sell more oil at the bottom of the cycle, which is both the wrong time to be selling from any logical standpoint, but it also further reduces the prices because supply is increased. What are your other choices? Well, the choices they're really going for is to raid the permanent fund. So even the little bit they save, they want to now consume. Because they're saying like, no, we can't impose an income tax, that's too painful. But actually, as we've seen, this is worse than an income tax because it's a per head tax applied to whoever equally with no consent. But you can see this is what is driving problems in Venezuela, Russia, Saudi Arabia, all across the world. Because if, think conceptually, if Alaska had said this was sale of an asset, this government revenues would have been just a flat line. There would have been no increase and decrease. The volatility would have been just stripped out. So, and on the positive side of our structure, so this is sort of the implications of, just using this lens to see what's been going on from a resource curse angle. I just want to talk a little bit about the design and the positives of the structure. The most critical element in our structure is the citizens' dividend. Now, most of you all live in either Delhi or Gurgaon or Noida, right? How many of you feel that you own the sand in the river, in the Yamuna? Put up your hands. No, there is one person there who feels she owns the sand in the Yamuna. Now, the reason is there is really no endowment effect in a sense. There's nothing that you're getting from it. It's somewhere Sarkar looking after it. So the citizens' dividend is designed to link the individual to that inheritance. If you think of Ostrom's theory again, you'll see that, individuals have to benefit from the commons for them to take care of the commons. In a similar vein, the citizens' dividend creates the link so that if you then see somebody stealing sand from the Yamuna, then you have a duty to your child and you have a financial incentive to raise a voice. This is the primary part of the design, and as a result of this, lots of things start changing. Now I just want to move to now this is just minerals, I want to move to a larger frame of implications of what we're doing. Now, the Pope's encyclical on the environment is actually the starting point, and it's a brilliant moral document that I recommend everybody reads. But he frames our global problems as essentially two. We have what we call a common home problem, which is the environment problem, global warming being one component of it, but we have many other environment problems. We have an economic system problem also, with rising inequality and extreme and sort of persistent extreme poverty being two symptoms of those. Neither of these two are we really being able to solve because of the political system, which is controlled by money, and that's pretty obvious. And where does the money principally come from? Crony capitalism, which again comes from rent-thick sectors, classically minerals and land, and government approvals of various kinds, but these are your classic ones. And you can see it. I mean, think about our scams in the country. Any scam over 1 lakh crores is probably a mineral or a land scam, or some sort of a spectrum, 2G, coal, iron ore. And then at an even deeper level, we go one step further. Over the last 500 years or so, we as a people have moved away from community thinking to individualism. Individualism has come to the fore, and we've also moved away from custodianship of the planet to consumption of the planet. And in our entire structure, we're trying to reverse all of this. Sort of, by principle one, we own the minerals in common or natural resources in common, we're bringing community to the forefront. Through principle two, inheritance, we are custodians of the inheritance of future generations. We are therefore custodians of the planet for future generations. We don't have a right to consume the planet the way we are. Zero loss mining, a third principle, basically starts putting pressure on the crony capitalist nexus, with the citizens' dividend as the controlling aspect. People now, everybody will start wanting to know what are the terms of our contract. We've seen how this loss from the commons is a big cause of our growing inequality, and also the citizens' dividend could address poverty, and it does a number of other kinds of, the citizens' dividend, by the way, is also a form of universal basic income, which has its own separate large-scale range of effects. And on the environment side, you can see from a multiplicity of channels, we are sort of controlling the environment, but fundamentally from reframing the environment as something we have to preserve, we're custodians of, and not something we can consume. And if you think about it from a political angle, today with this argument, I can go to somebody who wants Vikas, somebody who's a climate change denier or a global warming denier, and say, even for you, this makes sense because we're not saying stop mining. We're saying continue mining, but in a way which is fair to everybody, including yourself. Even if you deny global warming, you'll still say, like, why should we lose any money on our inheritance? Right. The moment you accept that argument, then the argument very naturally comes to any other inheritance. Because the logic is the same. It's intergenerational equity. Our children have as much a right to our minerals as to the tree on top of the minerals. So this may also afford a path into, an indirect path into resolving many other global problems. Now coming specifically, I know this is all about land. So let me also show you some of the other possible extensions of this idea. In land, for instance, one classical thing is when we have a land acquisition from somebody, we've effectively taken away their inheritance or the children's inheritance, and what have we taken away? A stream of income which the crop represents. So one possibility would be to actually compensate, if you remember the old land acquisition bill, they talked about a 20-year annuity. But why can't we design effectively a perpetual mutual fund where every year they keep getting a stream, sort of the income on the fund, and the fund passes on generation to generation. So you've converted an land inheritance into a perpetuity in finance terms. Different idea could be if you look at prices of land and why land is so expensive, and this is a big economic issue in India not really talked about. The fact that property prices are so high reduces our income because a lot of businesses become unviable because of land being so high. And if you actually go to the West and look to buy property, you'll be amazed how cheap property is even in like big cities, except for some of the main things. Now the reason land is valuable, let's say you owned a place in what's a rich part of town here?
Yes.
Okay. In Chanakyapuri, you've got a piece of land. It's worth crores and crores. But is it a result of anything that the owner did? No, right? The value of property comes from the fact that the city has developed around it. It's actually society has created the value of the land. So if you go to the West, the way they deal with it is they have a property tax of typically 1 to 2% of the capital value of the property, which is not a tax, but really a compensation or a way to get back the value of the property which society has created. Now, imagine a structure where you have, now Indian property taxes are typically about 1/100th of this, maybe 0.1% or even 0.01%, some places even not at all. If you have a structure where you tax at this 1 to 2% on this basis, society created value, and dividend it back, right, then you have a fair system, because what the society has created in common, you're dividending out to everybody for what they have contributed. Another way to look at land. So, maybe I should just end here. I think there's like quite a lot to absorb already, and we can talk about some other stuff on environment and all also.